The old neighborhood of Ashthorne Hollow had always seemed like a place torn from another time. The houses stood shoulder to shoulder in neat rows, their gables sharp against the autumn sky, their windows like watchful eyes. Marcus and Elena Hadley had moved there in late October, lured by the promise of quiet streets and a slower pace of life for themselves and their 12-year-old daughter, Claire. The air smelled faintly of burning leaves, and each evening the fog rolled down from the hills as though the town itself exhaled secrets. They felt they had stumbled upon something quaint and peaceful, though a certain heaviness lingered that Marcus especially could not quite shake. On their third night, as jack-o'-lanterns began to glow on porches, a sharp knock rattled the Hadleys' front door. Eleanor opened it to find two neighbors standing there, Mr. and Mrs. Wren, who introduced themselves with uncanny warmth. Mr. Wren was tall, pale, and dressed in a perfectly pressed suit that seemed too formal for an evening call. Mrs. Wren wore a flowing black dress, her smile revealing teeth a shade too white. They spoke with a practiced charm complimenting the Hadleys' daughter, admiring their home, and extending an invitation to a Halloween party they hosted each year in their sprawling Victorian mansion at the end of the block. "Everyone in the neighborhood comes," Mrs. Wren said, her voice like velvet. "You simply must join us." Marcus hesitated. There was something in the way Mrs. Wren's gaze lingered on Claire that made his stomach tighten. Eleanor, however, delighted at the chance to meet new people, accepted quickly. "That sounds wonderful," she said, ignoring the flicker of unease in her husband's eyes. Claire, for her part, was fascinated by the Wrens. She had always been drawn to mystery, and these neighbors felt like characters from one of her books. Still, when Mr. Wren's eyes locked on hers, she felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. Later that night, Marcus voiced his concern. "There's something off about them, Lena. Did you notice how they never seem to blink? Or how cold Mrs. Wren's hand felt?" Eleanor laughed gently, brushing his worries aside. "They're just eccentric. Every neighborhood has its characters. Besides, it's just a Halloween party. We can't hide in this house forever." Claire, listening from the staircase, said softly, "They looked hungry." Her parents glanced at her uneasily, but Eleanor quickly dismissed it. "You've been reading too many spooky stories," she said, though her words failed to erase the chill Claire's observation left behind. The next day, they explored more of Ashthorne Hollow. The town seemed pleasant enough. Children practiced costumes in the streets, and shopkeepers greeted them kindly. Yet Marcus noticed something peculiar. When he asked other townsfolk about the Wrens, they offered only vague, guarded responses. "They've been here longer than anyone," muttered the grocer before quickly changing the subject. An older woman outside the bakery simply crossed herself and shuffled away. When Marcus tried pressing further, he was met with nervous smiles and silence, as if the Wrens were a topic better left undisturbed. That evening, a thick fog swallowed the streets as the Hadleys prepared for the party. Elena chose her costume, a witch's gown and hat, while Marcus reluctantly donned a mask of a Venetian phantom. Claire dressed as a black cat, her bright eyes wary but excited. As they left their home, they noticed every porch light was lit, every pumpkin grinned, and the air seemed charged, as if the entire neighborhood held its breath. The Wrens' mansion loomed at the end of the street, its windows glowing warmly, its silhouette rising taller than the rest. When the Wrens greeted them at the door, the house smelled of spiced cider and candle wax. Music drifted from a gramophone, and guests in elaborate costumes laughed and mingled beneath chandeliers. For a moment, the Hadleys relaxed, swept up in the festive atmosphere. Yet Marcus could not shake the way the Wrens hovered close, watching with a careful intensity. And when Mrs. Wren whispered to Claire, "You look absolutely delicious tonight," Marcus felt every instinct scream that they had walked into something far darker than a simple neighborhood gathering. The Wren mansion was a labyrinth of flickering candlelight, velvet curtains, and polished wood that gleamed under the glow of chandeliers. Each corner of the house seemed designed to enchant, but beneath the elegance lingered a strange unease. The music that filled the air was cheerful but oddly dated, as though lifted from another century. Claire clung to her father's side, her small black cat ears twitching as if listening for something only she could hear. Marcus, though trying to remain calm, kept glancing at the door, already plotting how he could persuade his family to leave early. Eleanor, on the other hand, was delighted. She laughed with the other guests, sipping from a glass of cider that tasted richer than any she had ever had. The other neighbors, men and women, dressed in elaborate period costumes, were charming in conversation, though Marcus noticed their peculiar pallor and the way they avoided the trays of food. Instead, their glasses shimmered with a dark liquid that was decidedly not cider. He whispered to Elena, "Do you see what they're drinking?" She glanced, shrugged, and smiled. "It's probably wine. Stop being so suspicious." The Wrens moved gracefully through the crowd, their presence commanding yet oddly silent, as if the music dimmed whenever they passed. Mr. Wren approached Marcus, his voice low and smooth. "So pleased you came. Not everyone accepts so eagerly. Some take convincing." His smile did not reach his eyes, and Marcus felt the words strike him as a warning more than a compliment. Marcus forced a polite nod, replying, "We wanted to meet the neighbors." Mr. Wren leaned closer. "Oh, you'll know them better than you think, in time." Meanwhile, Mrs. Wren had taken a keen interest in Claire, leading her toward a corner where children played a muted game of hide-and-seek among velvet drapes and antique mirrors. These children were pale too, their laughter high-pitched and brittle, their costumes oddly archaic. One boy wore a sailor's outfit that looked 100 years old, another a frilly gown yellowed with age. "Go on, dear," Mrs. Wren urged Claire. "They've been waiting for a new friend." Claire hesitated, glancing at her parents, but Mrs. Wren's hand on her shoulder was cold and insistent. Marcus soon lost sight of Claire in the crowd, panic prickling beneath his mask. He tugged at Eleanor's arm. "Where's Claire?" Eleanor scanned the room, her smile faltering. "She was right here." They searched, weaving through the sea of costumed guests, their whispers drowned by the gramophone's eerie music. In a shadowed corridor, Marcus thought he heard his daughter's giggle echoing, followed by a hush as if someone pressed a finger to her lips. His heart hammered as he pushed down the hall, only to find empty rooms adorned with portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow him. Eventually, Claire reappeared at his side, her cheeks flushed and her eyes wide. "They were strange," she whispered, clinging to his arm. "They said they've been playing here for hundreds of years. One girl told me she died in this house." Marcus froze, staring at his daughter. Eleanor frowned, brushing it off nervously. "It's just make-believe," Children say all kinds of things at parties. Yet Marcus saw the tremble in Claire's hands and knew she hadn't imagined it. The Wrens gathered everyone in the grand hall, announcing it was time for the highlight of the evening. The unveiling of the Hall of Shadows, a tradition, they said, for every guest. Double doors creaked open to reveal a staircase descending into darkness. Candles flickered along the walls, guiding the way down. Guests eagerly followed, some laughing, others silent with anticipation. Eleanor squeezed Marcus's hand, whispering, "It's all part of the fun." But as Claire pressed herself against him, whispering, "Don't go," Marcus realized that the night was about to unravel into something far more sinister than he had dared imagine. The descent into the Hall of Shadows was suffocating. The stone staircase spiraled downward, narrowing as if it were carved not for comfort, but for confinement. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint light from above quickly faded, leaving only the trembling glow of candles set into iron sconces. Marcus held Claire's hand tightly, his heart pounding as the crowd murmured with excitement. Eleanor followed beside them, still insisting it was a harmless tradition, though her voice now carried an uncertain edge. At the foot of the stairs, the guests gathered in a cavernous chamber lined with mirrors that reflected their shapes in grotesque distortions. The Wrens took their place at the center of the room. Mrs. Wren raised a glass of crimson liquid, her smile sharp and knowing. "To our new friends," she declared, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "May they find themselves at home." Laughter rippled through the crowd, though Marcus noticed something chilling. In the mirrors, some reflections did not appear at all. Where the Wrens should have been, there was only the flicker of candles and the shadows of others. He felt his stomach lurch, and instinct told him this was no illusion. Claire tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, look." Across the room, the pale children she'd played with earlier stood motionless, their eyes fixed hungrily on her. Their smiles stretched unnaturally wide, showing too many teeth. One girl mouthed a single word across the distance, "Stay." Marcus wrapped an arm around his daughter protectively, glaring back at the children as if to shield her from their silent invitation. Eleanor saw it too now, her face pale. She leaned toward Marcus, whispering, "You were right. Something's not normal about this." The ritual began. Mr. Wren dimmed the candles until the room was cloaked in shadows. Guests chanted softly, words Marcus could not understand, their voices blending into a chilling hymn. The air thickened, pressing against his lungs, as though the chamber itself resisted their presence. A large wooden chest was brought forward, its surface carved with symbols that looked disturbingly like veins pulsing beneath the wood. From it, Mrs. Wren retrieved a mask of bone and placed it upon her face. The crowd cheered, but Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. This was no party. It was a ceremony. Suddenly, the mirrors around the room shivered. Their surfaces rippled as though liquid, and from them figures began to emerge. Gaunt, hollow-eyed shapes with elongated fingers and mouths twisted into permanent snarls. They hovered at the edges of the crowd, and to Marcus's horror, the other guests welcomed them, embracing them like kin. Eleanor clutched his arm, her earlier dismissal of his fears collapsing into raw terror. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice shaking. Marcus nodded. His gaze locked on the Wrens, who now seemed less human than ever. Their eyes glowed faintly, Their teeth glistened like ivory daggers in the flickering dark. Claire's frightened cry pierced the chance when one of the pale children seized her wrist. "No!" Marcus roared, yanking her back with all his strength. The child hissed, baring small pointed teeth before slinking back into the shadows. The room erupted with laughter, high, cruel, and echoing, while Mrs. Wren stepped closer, her voice sweet and venomous. "It seems our new friends are reluctant, but every family in Ashthorne Hollow pays their due. You are no exception." Her words rang with finality, as if their fate had already been sealed. Marcus knew then that this wasn't merely a party. It was a trap, centuries old and repeated each year. The Wrens had lured them into their ritual, expecting them to submit, to become part of whatever nightmare bound this town together. His instinct screamed for him to fight, to protect his daughter and wife at any cost. Gripping Claire's hand, he whispered to Elena, "On my signal, we run." The Wren's eyes narrowed, sensing defiance. The candles flared, the chants rose, and the walls seemed to close in. The Hadleys stood on the precipice of horror, caught between escape and the abyss of the Wren's eternal hunger. The chamber pulsed with shadows, every mirror rippling like a pool of dark water. The Wrens circled the Hadleys with predatory grace, their smiles wide and glistening. Mrs. Wren's voice slid through the chanting like a blade. "Every family must offer blood to remain here. You'll find that Ashthorne Hollow takes care of its own, provided they obey." Marcus felt Eleanor's trembling hand slip into his. Claire clung to him, whispering, "Daddy, I don't want to stay. Please." That plea was enough to ignite his resolve. He would burn this entire cursed neighborhood to the ground before letting them have his daughter. Marcus lunged suddenly, seizing one of the tall iron candle stands and swinging it toward the nearest mirror. Glass shattered with a deafening crack, sending shards spraying across the stone floor. A scream rose, not from his family, but from the pale guests. The distorted figures emerging from the mirrors recoiled, their shapes flickering like smoke in the wind. "Run!" Marcus shouted, dragging Claire and Elena toward the staircase. Chaos erupted around them. The Wrens hissed, their voices no longer elegant, but guttural, monstrous. Mr. Wren's hand shot out, clawed and pale, grazing Marcus's arm as he pulled free. The staircase twisted upward, the air thick with shrieks. Behind them, the pale children scrambled after them like spiders, their laughter sharp as glass. Claire stumbled, nearly falling, but Marcus scooped her up, his lungs burning as he climbed. Elena clutched the wall for balance, her eyes wild with terror. "We'll never make it," she cried. "Yes, we will," Marcus barked, more to himself than to her. At the top of the stairs, the grand doors loomed, but when he shoved them, they did not budge. Locked, Mrs. Wren's laughter echoed up from below. "Do you think you can leave? Everyone who comes to our hall stays forever. Your blood will bind you to us." Her words slithered through Marcus's mind like poison, but he grit his teeth and slammed the iron stand against the doors. The wood cracked, splinters flying. Elena joined him, striking again and again until the lock finally tore loose. The doors burst open, and cold night air rushed in like salvation. They tumbled into the street, the fog curling thick around them, but the neighborhood had changed. The once welcoming porches were dark, the jack-o'-lanterns melted into grotesque sneers, their candles guttered out. Every house seemed abandoned, windows black, shutters hanging loose. It was as though Ashthorne Hollow had shed its mask, revealing its true corpse-like face. The Wrens emerged from the mansion, their bodies shifting in the mist, more shadow than flesh. "You cannot escape," Mr. Wren growled, his voice no longer human, but the low thunder of an ancient predator. Marcus grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward their home, Claire still in his arms. But when they'd reached it, their own house looked hollow, its windows gaping like empty sockets. The key trembled in Marcus's grip as he tried the door. It turned, but the house inside was not the one they had moved into. The rooms were grey, stripped bare, filled with cobwebs and dust centuries thick. Claire buried her face in his shoulder, sobbing. "We don't belong here," she cried. For the first time, Marcus realized she was right. Perhaps they had never belonged. The Wrens advanced, their pale forms gliding closer. Marcus backed into the ruined house, desperation clawing at him. His eyes darted around until they landed on the fireplace. The logs within were cold, but the embers from the candle stand still glowed faintly at its tip. With a roar, he hurled it into the hearth. Flames leapt to life, hungrily devouring the dry wood, then spreading across the room as if the house itself wanted to burn. The Wrens hissed and shrieked, recoiling from the sudden blaze. Shadows writhed on the walls, fleeing from the fire's light. Marcus pulled Elena and Claire through the back door as fire swallowed the house. The mist parted, and for a heartbeat, the street ahead looked normal again. Warm lights in windows, distant laughter of unseen neighbors. But Marcus knew better. He didn't stop running until the three of them reached the highway, leaving Ashthorne Hollow behind. Its cursed fog shrinking in the rearview mirror as they sped away. And yet, as the town disappeared, Marcus glanced at Claire in the rear seat. She was pale, her eyes distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but trembling with something ancient. She said, "I'll always belong to them. She said they'll come for me." Eleanor turned sharply, horrified. Marcus gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles white. Though they had escaped the Wrens' mansion, he knew the nightmare wasn't over. Ashthorne Hollow didn't let go. It waited, patient and hungry, for its due.